Hello, as this time we come to the sixth Sunday of Ordinary Time, and the readings for this session, the first comes from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 17, verse 58. The second reading from 1 Corinthians, we continue what Paul started last time in chapter 15, this time verse 12, and then verses 16 through 20. And finally, the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 6, verse 17, and then we skip to verses 20 through 26. Now, maybe just to catch up a little bit, remember again, we're following the pattern of Luke, Acts as we move through this year. From the reading that we had last time to this time, there is some skipping. And the reason for this has to do somewhat with the material because keep in mind that although Luke has his own style, he follows basically the pattern set in place by Mark and followed by Matthew. So where have we been? Well, after the reading we heard last time, there were two healings of a leper and a paralytic. This would be verses 12 through 16 and verses 17 through 26. This is followed by the call of Levi. Now we generally call him Matthew, but Luke calls him Levi. This would be in verses 27 through 29. Then there's a controversy that breaks out, and again in this gospel, and you have to be very concerned about or careful about this with regard to the Pharisees, but there is a controversy that Jesus has about fasting, and then he tells a little parable. You don't put a patch on an old garment, but rather on a new garment, and all of this is taking place in verses 30 through 39. Now that's all in chapter 5. So what I'm just kind of bringing us up to date here. As we come to chapter 6, the first part, now notice we're going to pick up our reading here at verse 17. So what goes on in verses 1 through 16 is that there is a controversy that, again, Jesus has with regard to the Sabbath day. And the conclusion of that little discussion, and again, we've looked at it in other times, is that indeed the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. In verse 14 of chapter 6, so we're getting close to where we are, Jesus is pictured again as calling the disciples by name. In this particular listing of names, he lists Bartholomew, which is not found in the others. He calls Simon the Zealot, and we have discussed that at other times, and a fellow named Judas, who is called son of James. So what I'm saying is when you compare the listing of apostles named by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there are some differences, and this would be the difference. Now, we're not going to hear this on our Sunday reading, but I'm just kind of bringing us up to date on that. Now we come to the reading that we're going to hear this time, sometimes called the Sermon on the Plain. Now, there's a contrast here between Matthew, who of course pictures Jesus as going up on a hill or a mountain, and when he gives his famous Sermon on the Mount, he is pictured as having gone on, their idea of a mountain would be more our hill, but anyway, it's up on a upper place. And the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew begins with the famous Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, etc. And there are well, 8 or 9 of them actually, depending on how you count, given by Jesus. Luke is going to do this very differently. And so he pictures Jesus as coming down and standing on a level ground, and then very carefully kind of looking and noticing that there are people from all different areas who are being addressed. Now, I don't know how you can picture going this way, but nevertheless, it is a distinctive difference between the way in which Matthew does it and in which Luke does it. And the way in which now Luke presents it is that he gives four beatitudes, which will be matched by 4 woes. So a very different style, although it is the style that is characteristic of Luke, the way in which he likes to tell things and to arrange things. Now, blessed are the poor in spirit. No, that's the way in which Matthew does it. Blessed are the poor, says Luke. So you can, right away, there's a difference of understanding. Now, who are the poor? And in biblical culture, the poor are those who live in a social reality that is different rather than an economic one. So when we think of the poor here, don't necessarily think of those who are literally don't have sufficient food and money, although certainly that's true. But the poor here have to do with one's status socially in life. In antiquity, a person became rich because an individual had the power to take wealth from someone else, and they were unable, the power was taken from them, and they were unable to defend themselves. So in the ancient world, and we've mentioned this before, but just to bring this into play here, that in the ancient world, to have power enables you to be wealthy. That's not the way it works in our society. In our society, it's really the reverse, isn't it? For those who are wealthy, they are able to achieve power. So keep that in mind, that when we're looking at the way in which the Mediterranean world thought of things or saw things, it was in that way. So a poor person was powerless, okay, unable to defend, and this, of course, is what would happen. They would be unable to defend their status and wealth. And so that's why uniquely 3 persons or 3 groups are often mentioned as falling into that category, namely the poor, the widow, and the orphan, because they are powerless to take care of themselves or have any social status, if you want, in the society of the times. Now, blessed are the poor. In some ways, the Beatitudes are highly provocative, because why would one be happy to be poor, okay? And it's outrageous in any age to congratulate someone being poor or being hungry or weeping or reveling in conditions that are not beneficial. Why would that be something that should be praised? Blessed are they who are hungry, for being hungry doesn't make a sense. So in that sense, it appears foolish to declare unfortunate the wealthy, the well-fed, those who enjoy the good reputation in life. From a moral point of view, these last four states are not in themselves bad. Other things being equal, they are perfectly desirable. What the Beatitudes basically depict is a situation of extreme vulnerability. The poor can only benefit from the action of God, and the rich have much to fear or to lose. So that's the way in which now, all of this a little bit kind of puzzle-wise, putting together pieces, that Luke develops it. You have the four, blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, and those are matched by woe to those who are blessed, woes to those who are rich, woe to those who are filled. And it kind of represents a pattern that, as we've noticed earlier on, is characteristic of Luke, namely the idea of the reversal. So what is the situation now will be reversed, and the opposite will be the case. So that's a general theme, as you remember, developed and used by the Lucan tradition. So what more can we say? In the Beatitudes, and they are called, well, Beatitudes, blessed, happy. But keep in mind that wow, why would the poor be blessed? Why would you be glad, as I mentioned, to be poor? So it's important to keep in mind some of the things that we have just suggested. Jesus promises a reward from God to those who suffer shameful experiences. When God honors the socially unfortunate, everyone will know their true status. So Jesus' words are primarily words of consolation to people who desperately needed to hear good news. So keep that in mind. Blessed are the poor. They are those who are suffering, but Jesus is promising by his message something much more helpful and beneficial. As I mentioned, the poor person is powerless. The orphan, by the way, it means that there were no adults to protect their interest. So orphans were kind of left out there. The widow, who has no son, of course, is left on her own to take care of things. And so very often, when we talk about those who are in possession of goods, from the point of view of the times, they are greedy. And therefore, this is in contrast to the socially unfortunate. Now, when we think of greedy, we tend to think of goods, and certainly that's okay, but there's the whole idea of social position here that is at work. All right, so all of that suggests that there's a lot more going on here from the viewpoint in which Luke is telling his story. The poor, and we have noticed this, and I do mention it again, because in Luke's story, he is very realistic about wealth and possession. You will remember that, as we will note and have noted, that there are many parables and stories that Luke remembers that has to do with goods, with money. And we also have noticed that this world is what operates in what is called a limited economy. And it deals with not only grain and livestock, but also there is a limited amount of honor, fellowship, friendship, reputation, love, status, security, or power. So everything is limited. Again, very different, is it not, from the way in which we are accustomed to think about things. So in a limited economy or a limited world, there's only so much power. There's only so much honor. So if someone is dishonored, well, the honor is taken away from that person, but given to someone else. So it's not lost. It's when we talk about economy like a loaf of bread, it's easy to get concrete. When we talk about honor, well, that's a little more ethereal, but nevertheless, there is only so much honor, there is only so much power, and someone who gets more of that is considered, and that's what the point I was making, to be greedy. All of that is background to this series of blessed and woes that are used by Luke. As we pointed out, there really are, and we will notice this, by the way, as we move on next time, that there are really three sections here to Luke's Sermon on the Plain. First of all, the blessings and woes, which we're looking at here, which are in verses 20 through 26. Then an exhortation, we'll see next time, to love one's enemy. These would be in verses 27 through 36. And finally, a collection of maxims that Luke presents here, which begins in verse 37 and goes to verse 49. Some of these, and one maybe is interested in seeing where Luke gets some of this material, are utterances which are found in the wisdom literature and also are found in the Psalms. So clearly, Luke has at his disposal important sources for developing his message here. So again, a little bit of background. What the Beatitudes basically depict, therefore, is a situation of extreme vulnerability. And as I mentioned, in this case, the poor can only benefit from the action of God. The rich have much to lose. It is the vulnerable who will make the world safe for humanity. So keep in mind the reversal idea. Those who are enjoying things now, later will not. Those who do not enjoy things now, later will. It is a kind of important pattern developed by Luke in his gospel. So all of that, there are certainly some similarities between Matthew and Luke here, but notice as we kind of explore and listen to the differences as Luke presents it. And he likes this contrasting, and it works very nice here, doesn't it? 4 on this side, 4 on this side, and you can see, we can see how they contrast with one another. All right, let's move on this time to the prophet Jeremiah, who is our first reading, and he here uses some examples from nature. The barren bush is one who trusts only in his fellow human beings and grows in an inhospitable environment. So I have to give us a little bit of background. Keep in mind, of course, that prophets like Jeremiah are poets. We often think of them, of course, as prophets and speaking God's word and things like that, but they're also poets. And when you read and look at the prophets, you will see, even when you read the text, that it is arranged to kind of the way in which often poetry is. Now, it isn't exactly poetry the way perhaps we are taught and used to. But nevertheless, it is a style that was characteristic in Hebrew writing, Jewish writing, and the prophets are sometimes, like Jeremiah and the others, are kind of overlooked for the kind of classic next way in which they write and express their idea. So here he uses the example of, as I mentioned, a barren bush and a tree. Now, he speaks about the idea of lava. Okay, now, there were volcanoes in the Middle East, and people did know about them and were aware of them. And lava, as one thinks of a volcano erupting, flows down over the rock, but when it cools, it turns to rock. When it is still kind of warm, it is like mud that flows down the side of a volcano. Eventually, it turns, by the way, to be a kind of grayish dust. I give you all of this kind of background. And then from that, bricks were often made for building, but that would be fine for that. But it does not support vegetation. So the contrast, the contrast here to the barren bush is to the tree which is planted near a stream. And the poetry of the prophet here says that is the one or the group who places their trust in God or in the Lord. So if humanity puts its trust in the Creator, in the Lord, its foundation, its roots are in living water. So you get all these kind of images here: dust, fruit, trees, barren branches, all of the kinds of things that really one finds in nature. So that's a little bit, we think, one of the reasons for choosing this particular reading for our time. Now, there is mentioned in the reading of Jeremiah to the Arabah. The Arabah was a desert area that is part of the rift extending from the Jordan Valley south to the Gulf of Aqaba. Was known as the wilderness. It's described as burnt dust, lava, or made the way it is by the unmerciful presence of the sun. There are very, very few rainy days in this area of Israel, okay? So it's every day. Now, some of you might like that, but every day it's hot, every day it's sunny, and there is little or no breeze, and so it's a tough place to live, and obviously a tough place to grow anything, okay? So there would be very little fruitful or grain development in the Arabah, okay? Or the wilderness. And I think the argument that poetically Jeremiah is making, that in this kind of situation, where there is no change of season, where everything stays the same all the time, and I'm saying, well, some of you may think that wouldn't be so bad, but indeed it might not be. The prophet is saying that what is true about nature is true about the heart of people. There is no change in heart. And that's what needs to be done says Jeremiah, that one needs to be open to the Lord, trusting in the Lord's way. And that's kind of the background to this little particular section. So the barren bush versus the tree. Again, you get a certain contrast. Notice that fits nicely with what we saw Luke does in the gospel. Contrasts are a good way sometimes of seeing things in a different way. So all of that, a little bit background. Also, if Psalm 1, which is the sung psalm of this time, is used, there is also reference to those things that the prophet Jeremiah here is suggesting. A wayward heart trusts in human strength. The heart of the Lord that turns to the Lord receives the strength and helps that he needs. And finally, a word as we move on here, back to the second reading, the letter of Paul to the Corinthians. We saw last time that Paul gives names those who have seen the risen Lord, then declares himself as one who has received the message from the Lord, as one born out of time. It's a very important section here, because the Spirit-filled people are those who are already having faith in God. Now, they have not. And there apparently is a little struggle here that Paul has with a philosopher of the time, a Jewish thinker who lived and wrote in Alexandria in Egypt, who lived between 20 before the common time and 5 of the common era, named Philo. Paul here kind of takes on a little bit Philo, who thought that you could possess eternal life in this world. Well, that might be a Johannine thought, but it's not a Pauline thought. And so the argument that Paul is making here is that there are 4 conclusions that we need to pay attention to. First of all, Christ has not been raised. Secondly, Paul's preaching misrepresents God. Paul still believes that sinners, if they do not accept the teaching of Jesus, then nothing has changed. And those who died as Christians are fools because they are totally lost. Well, Paul argues against all of this, is very much interested in developing, and as you read through further in this section of the Corinthians, the importance of our acceptance of and belief in the risen Jesus. So all of that is, again, I encourage you, go back to read chapter 15 of Paul's letter, and the importance he makes for establishing the validity of the resurrection of Jesus. So once again, the Beatitudes of Luke match in a certain way things that went on. By the way, if you want to look at a pattern that Luke has developed, is the story of the Magnificat, which is found in chapter 1 of Luke's story, where there is a reversal of viewpoints that are taking place there. All right, thank you very much for being with us. Hope to see you again.